I think everything will be fine. We'll start the live in a minute. We start. Now it's just a matter of setting up the cameras. And now we're starting the live in a minute. I hope everyone is well. The live will talk a little about democracy. Perhaps a way that few of you have heard, but democracy is something very natural indeed. And it has its bases on the Amerindian continent, at least as far as I know. Then they made a kind of copy. Okay, it's 8 p.m. and we're in Sao Paulo, and today is April 2nd, 2025. Our live today will talk about dynamic democracies. You are the system. It's funny, isn't it? We always want to fight the system, and now I'm saying that you are the system. But talking about dynamic democracies, okay? Dynamic democracies are something natural. If you bring some living beings together, they will basically have a democratic process. Few species have those very strong fights of the so-called alpha male, that whole thing. Normally it's a democratic process, it's a union. They get together and start doing things. Democracies are dynamic. One of the things we see in dynamic democracies is when you have a bunch of birds that are flying from one continent to another. They go in a triangle shape often, and they alternate who is in front. So, dynamic democracy is a process of changing leadership. And when I say that you are the system, it means that every time you are in a system, democratic or non democratic, you are an example, you are the system, you are part of it, and the people who are on your side can follow you, or you are following someone, so you are the system, and this is important for you to know. Because sometimes we end up thinking, no, the system, let's fight the system. If you are the system, you have to regulate yourself and know what to choose and know how to behave in the face of the things that happen around you. Okay, let's go. The first thing we are going to talk about in dynamic democracy is democracy, freedom, and the state. Opa. Democracy is something simple. You take, and I'll start with the state. You have a region, you have a space. These spaces have some living beings in this space, and then some living beings that suddenly have a human consciousness. The humans start to do things that promote the well-being of other humans and other creatures in the space, other living beings. So the space, in fact, needs to have a history. The state, this space that is this volume, the state comes from the history of a space. What is a state? The history of a space. We have the Brazilian state. So, what was the history of Brazil like? And the history of Brazil is an interesting thing for us to know a little bit about. Also, to differentiate dynamic democracies from non dynamic ones, from Republican ones, for example, which are not dynamic, okay? In the history of Brazil, for example, back then, before the invasion of Brazil, you had Europe, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the English, and so on. And suddenly, there in Europe, they created the concept of republic, norms, and rules. In Europe, they created the concept of truth, that man is evil by nature and he must have rules and norms, otherwise, he becomes an animal. And then, with these resources, with this republic, with this law, with these norms, they come to another continent, invade another continent, and do not respect democracy or the freedom of the living beings that are on this other continent. They impose enormously different rules, which is what we have in our heads today, right? Because the original culture, in fact, remained among our Amerindians. Our original peoples are much more restricted. It's not in my head, or yours, possibly. unless you are part of an Amerindian people, an original people, okay? I study this a little bit, but things don't come together that way. So it's important for you to know what democracy is. You have a region, a community. Let's go. Here's a very simple example to tell you about democracy. You have a group of friends, friends, and friends, five friends and friends, and you go with five friends, more or less your age. You go to a place, and suddenly, look, we're going to play a song. And suddenly, the leader of the group, when it's time to play a song, is this girl. Suddenly, the guys will say, no, but we're going to have a picnic. Suddenly, the leader of the picnic is this boy. And suddenly, they'll start a little joke telling, it's another boy or girl. It's Jorge, it's Abreu, Maria, it's Manuel. Do you understand? Every moment you have, every environment you are in, one is more of a leader than the other. This is dynamic democracy. Dynamic democracies change their leaders. There is not one leader all the time. Carnival reflects this a lot. During Carnival, you have those leaders, King Momo, who is a fake king. Freedom is real. What is freedom? Freedom to come, to stay, to remain, to be, to deny, and to leave. This is freedom. So when you are in a place, in a process where you cannot go, cannot be what you want to be, and cannot disobey, you do not have freedom. You simply do not have freedom. So dynamic democracy involves this whole process. You are together, but you are free. The state where we build history, our history, comes from a space. Sometimes people talk about properties. This is my space. This is my land. Okay. But if you think about exactly where you are, put a kilometer around you, up, down to the side, you in the middle of a sphere, a kilometer around, and think about 3,000 years ago. How many living beings were in this space that you are in now? A kilometer around. Just imagine 3,000 years ago and 3,000 years forward. You will see that you are not the owner of the space, it is the space. The living beings that inhabit it belong to the space, okay, but we create rules and regulations to manage the spaces, okay, fine. When you create these rules and regulations to manage the space, you start to accept these rules and regulations and you become the system. That's why I say democracy is dynamic. You are the system. Because the system is embedded in your brain since you were born, hammering away at you, it will happen, okay? I acquired a lot of these concepts from the book after I read the book, The Awakening of Everything. I always advise you to read it. It's a thick book, but it shows very well and took studies from texts in Europe that before the European Enlightenment, no revolutionary ideas existed. In Europe before the European Enlightenment, the revolutionary ideas and insights of the European Enlightenment were acquired after contact with the Amerindians from the American continent, contact with the original peoples. Then came the idea of democracy, of freedom, these beautiful things which do not always follow because they fell into the republic. And the republic is something that, in its essence, admits a man who is evil by nature. All the studies that were done wanting to prove that man is evil by nature had bias, had conflict of interest, had tendency to force the study so that man be bad force because the studies did not conclude that and all the evidence in nature shows that human groups come together and get along. It is natural to get along. There are few exceptions. And then the exception becomes a rule, and then the Republican comes and imposes this rule on everyone. So you have to think about the following dynamic democracies, okay? It is the original natural form of human organizations and one that humans often adopt. They are flexible democracies, a democracy that moves. It is a democracy in which the leader is not forever. I don't like it. Sometimes political parties always put a leader in place and repeat a leader one year, another year, and repeat the same leader. No, the leaders are interchanged because democracy is dynamic. It changes. The same leader does not remain. It is not a dictatorship, it is the exchange of the original leader, like a bird flying from one continent to another. That is the idea you have. So, dictatorial and republican systems have already imposed the most rigid and hierarchical system. When you impose a rigid and hierarchical system, you break this dynamic democracy. When you break dynamic democracy, you overload your brain. Even if you are a boss somewhere, your brain becomes overloaded. And you know that disease, that symptom of burnout that some people have? This overload is because the system is rigid, it is fixed, it doesn't give you a break, it doesn't give you a break. It creates a very high level of stress. People suffer, people enter a process of anxiety because there is no dynamism, no dynamic democracy. There is a Republican regime. For you to understand republicanism, the essence is this: I need a rule to make man good because man is evil by nature. But this Republican rule only helps a small social class. Normally, a class of 1% of the population, even less than that, is helped in the Republican system. It is important for you to know that the natural thing about human beings is dynamic democracy, that is natural. Okay, yes, but above all, you have a sense of belonging, of being with everyone together, of belonging. And the belonging that I told you about comes from the choreosensus. And the choreosensus is something that belongs to the cell itself. It transcends our consciousness, our mind, our consciousness, the mind, the one that unites interoception and proprioception. And interoception is part of our metabolism. And this metabolism, it is the metabolism, it is a reaction. It is something that it is a bunch of cells and chemical reactions. It does not have access to the cell's belonging. It only does what is around the cell. So we don't achieve this concept of belonging, but the mind searches for it. And the mind having consciousness, which is a reference, you have the mind, you have interoception and proprioception, and then you reference this mind in this feeling of pain or pleasure, in this feeling of work, of need. So in this feeling, you polarize this mind in this place of speech. Then you have consciousness, which is a reference of where you are with the mind that you have. Reference this moment, it is a consciousness. I always say that consciousness is the movement that is perceived to be produced in the metabolism, in all this brain chemistry that we offer, produces, and then consciousness comes. So it depends on your memories, your learning, your cultural background. It depends on a lot of things that are inside you. Okay? This is important. When the Republican processes come, we have a strong and serious problem of imposing rules. The height of republicanism are the Republicans who go there, change the rules, tax, not tax, do not do, change the rules. The Republican is that. Is this wrong or right? No, this is Republican. This is what Republicans are. You understand? So it starts from the assumption that man is evil by nature, so we need rules. And it is a concept. And we can live with Republicans, non Republicans, with those who have different religious philosophies than us. And what is important about this in these concepts, and it is good for you to know, look, there are things that are right, there are things that are wrong for you. For another person, there may also be things that are right and wrong and contrary to what you think. And for others, it has nothing to do with what you think. The problem, the big problem, is when people start separating right from wrong and place right and wrong too far apart. When you separate things, good and evil, we have a very big problem. Because if you separate good from evil, then you focus on the good and think that everything is evil. Let me explain a little better. There was a time when I heard relatives at home talking about how to clean the house, my wife, her sister, and a few others. First they vacuum, then they mop, then they broom, and it's a mess and no one person thinks that first the vacuum cleaner, then the vacuum cleaner, then the broom, then the cloth. Another person says first the cloth, then the vacuum cleaner, first the broom, then the vacuum cleaner. So look, even in these three orders, use the broom, the cloth, the damp cleaner, and the vacuum cleaner. The order of this can cause you to get one thing right and the other thing wrong. Hold on, but the other person thinks the opposite in a different order. And if this community separates good from evil, it will not allow itself to do the wrong thing. And the wrong thing is the thing I don't want to be done. And the Republican will impose that the right thing is this and not that. And there is no diplomacy, there is no negotiation. And what we need is to always negotiate right and wrong in our attitudes, even at home, even with our friends, much more than in the political part, even in the religious part. Right and wrong are always negotiated. And even when you negotiate right and wrong with someone or a group, you create value. The value is for the group. And this value for the group, you will tend to react to things that come in the group with this value. But this value is not the value for those outside the group. That's why I say that you are the system. From the moment you adopt the value, this value becomes part of the system, and you are the system. Jackson, why are you emphasizing so much that I am the system or that you are the system? Yes, because there are people who are looking at you, and there are people who feel that you are the oppressor or that you should be followed. And sometimes you just keep saying, no, blah, 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 the system, they're going to break the system. I'm saying that you are the system. And from the moment you become more flexible in your ideas, in your attitudes, it's like a school of fish. The school goes, everything goes together, okay? And if some birds in the school start to act differently, the school also moves that way. If you start to have different attitudes, those around you, their attitudes will change too. You are the system. But you are looking for your emotions and feelings in the form of your group, your bubble, your ideological group. And then you take this feeling from the group, but even with the feeling of the group going back and forth like a shoal of fish, you put your personal feeling in at some point, your feeling of dynamic democracies, of alternation of powers and change and flexibility and looking at things with a more personal vision and less of a group one. And suddenly you make a different move in the group and the group tends to change. Unless the group is actually Republican and it really is a top-down order, or the robot that controls the group, it's a hate group. If it's a hate group, we don't need to waste time talking about it because it's controlled by little robots. So you understand it's important for you to know this. Complex systems, and we are complex systems have this greater idea of complexity. In a complex system, you don't solve things with a single change. You change as if it were a kind of fog arriving, several fronts, several possibilities. And this is important. We are a complex system, and our democracy is dynamic, especially when you reach a state, a space where you are responsible for this space. In some way, at least at this moment, you are managing this space. Do you look at who is in this space? The space belongs to the living beings that inhabit it. Okay, which living beings? Living beings that have DNA. Plants, animals, other humans, and then you make a structure that encompasses everyone, that embraces everyone. Understand? This is a dynamic democracy. You will see that it embraces everyone. At some point, you lead this group. At some point, you see that someone else is led because they have a slightly better ability than you to do this or that thing, and you for that other thing, and you don't have that grudge against being the leader of having to be followed. You don't need to be followed, and you don't need to follow the behavior of others. But in the choreosensus, you imitate in order to belong. It is natural for you to make an average imitation in this group and in this space that you are in. But then you change places, you went to another culture, and you easily adapt to that space and those people, to that way of being, always showing respect for living beings, respect for the DNA that exists in that space. So this respect is important. You take this concept, this openness to other spaces, and knowing that you, at a time when you are in a space, you start to imitate those people and you are the system. There is no point in trying to overthrow the system, because you are the system, because you need to seek consciousness, seek the materiality of facts. And when you seek the materiality of facts, seek this materiality within your own feelings, not within a group, and within the facts that are real. Because sometimes emotions, the group leads you to believe and create fantasy, consciousness. It is based on feelings. And if the feeling is within a group, not even the materiality of the facts exists, and the feeling is moving the group. And when the feeling moves the group, you think that now the group has a consciousness of the truth. This is a very serious problem, because the truth imposes right and wrong. And the truth, when it distances right and wrong, you have the death of the system, because the system is together. Look, some will sweep before wiping with a wet mop, and others will wipe with a mop or vacuum. Some believe that heaven is here and hell is there. Others believe that hell is here and heaven is there. Okay, I don't believe in life after death, for example. I don't believe in life after death because there is no proof of life after death. But okay, so I want to build heaven here, but there are people who want to impose hell here because they only believe in life after death. That's why I say that sometimes politicians, when they are politicians who believe in life after death, it doesn't always bring social benefits, because his reward is later, everyone's reward is later. So these are people who are a little more polarized. Seeking the sky here is a characteristic, but in terms of respect, who thinks it isn't? But damn, there are rules and laws. Let's follow the rules, the laws, the rules, so as not to break this, so as not to break this harmony. So you have differences of ideas, but there are achievements. The rules are, this one is preferential. Go through the red light. Don't go through the red light. Go through the green light. You have the rules, and you try to negotiate these rules and rules with people. And when you create value in your group, you know that this value doesn't apply to another group. And the other group, by not following your value, is not bad. It's just another problem. And then you will see that dynamic democracy is a natural thing. And for you in your home, remember the following. You have your father, your mother, your son, or you, your wife and children. And sometimes there is a son or a daughter who is in charge of the house, sometimes during some play, sometimes it is the mother, sometimes the father, sometimes even the dog, the pet dog. There is a certain command of play. It is the center of attention. This center of attention is as if a dynamic democracy were taking place. Yes, but we have house rules, but they are not so strict, so strong. And whenever we follow these rules, we are the system. At some point, when the rules are a little tough in the house, oops, I have to be flexible in my way of seeing, perceiving, and being. If you are flexible and know that you are responsible for everything you perceive, and this perception of discomfort in a system, you can know that you are the system. And if you change, the system changes. You just have to negotiate, because democracies are naturally dynamic. Of course, you go to a factory somewhere, there is a hierarchy of positions. But even so, it's possible to talk, and it's possible at some point to make things more flexible, to make things easier for everyone. Guys, I wanted to leave this with you. I hope you liked it. It's a little shorter, but it's very focused on what you think, okay? Dynamic democracies are natural. It's natural for you to change who's in charge of the house, change who's in charge of the service or this task or that task. That's human nature. When the republic comes or when some people come and impose norms and rules, it overloads the human brain and it starts to cause a lot of pathologies that are complicated for human beings. So even if you are a boss somewhere, make being a boss more flexible. Give someone a voice so that you have flexibility and alternation of this power. And if we can achieve a true democracy at some point, a responsible state, we will be more flexible on the political side. This vision of powers and continuity and this dynamic democracy will happen and will ease the burden on everyone, for all living beings. It will even mitigate the climate emergencies that we are suffering so much from. Big hug. See you next Wednesday.